So if you can tell that your milk has gone a little bit bad, it smells a little bit sour, a little bit stale, there's a difference between, old milk and then sour milk. When your milk has gone sour, that's when a fermentation process has started to take place. Like I said, when you set it on the counter and it gets thicker, it's that fermentation process that is really set into place by the bacteria that are in the milk, and the process is called acidification. You wouldn't want to drink this milk, the sour milk, just like it is, or maybe put it in recipes where you're having it fresh. But it's particularly good in baked goods, especially if it is mixing with baking soda, baking powder. There is a scientific reaction when you mix this sour milk with your baking soda, and it just causes these bubbles that form, and that's why it's so good in a soda bread. Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Jenna Lee. I love bringing back tried and true homemaking skills here on our little farm in Missouri, and today we are going to do just that. It was totally typical for a family back in the day to have a family cow, and with that there was a lot of milk to process. Well, we don't have a family cow yet, but what we do is we pick up 4 gallons of milk every week from a local farmer here. But this week we were sick and just didn't get to processing all of that milk. And raw milk does not hold in the fridge for very long. So I've got a lot of raw cow's milk in the fridge that has gone sour, sad to say. But I'm not going to let it get the better of me. It would be very normal for Ma Ingalls or for the woman of the homestead to know how to use milk that has been sitting out too long or that has gone sour. So what I did was pull out a gallon of our raw cow's milk here and set it on the counter. It's been here for a couple hours, which has allowed it to kind of set. I'm going to use all the sour milk in some recipes today, and a similar way as you would use buttermilk. I also pulled out my sourdough starter, which we're also going to use in a discard recipe today, a couple of discard recipes. So I thought we could make sourdough discard double chocolate muffins. We're gonna make some biscuits so that we can have biscuits and gravy this weekend. We're also gonna make my favorite sourdough discard pancakes. All of these recipes we are gonna cook up and have and probably let ferment for the night and be able to use them throughout this weekend. That way I don't have to do a lot of cooking and baking for breakfast, and we'll just have muffins for snacks and all those things. And it's kind of perfect because this weekend is Mother's Day. Hello, Biscuits. Those ones smell so good.
So this first recipe I found on littlespoonfarm.com. I've tried a few of her sourdough recipes and they all turn out great. So I will put the recipe down below for you in the description box so you can go make some of these yourself. Any recipe that calls for a sourdough discard is meant to be used with the sourdough that has been unfed. So my sourdough I have kept in the fridge for a week. It is unfed and very hungry. And so I'm going to be using that here in this recipe. I'm going to be using a half a cup of that unfed sourdough starter. And then I'm going to feed my sourdough. So oftentimes when you're following sourdough recipes or you are just going through the routine of feeding your sourdough starter, you are required to discard half of the amount that is in your container and then feed it, right? And so this way, instead of just pouring that in the garbage or down the drain, you're putting it to good use and making something extra delicious. This recipe also calls for sour cream and milk, and I'm just using this really thick sour milk in place of both of those. I'm also using raw cane sugar, so it looks brown. It's not brown sugar, but it's just raw, unprocessed cane sugar. With most of these discard recipes, you can feel free to go ahead and bake them straight away. You can also choose to ferment them. So I'm going to put these in the fridge and let them ferment overnight and then bake them up in the morning. And I just prefer to have the fermented process. Those grains and flours seem to settle better in my stomach and it makes me feel so much better after the fermented process. So that's what I prefer. But if you want to just enjoy these delicious double chocolate muffins, go ahead and bake them right away.
Those muffins are so good. They're kind of tart.
You know me, I love having fresh ground wheat on hand at all times, and so it is time to grind up some more fresh wheat berries. Lately, I've been using these bread bags that I made. In fact, I made a video on how to make these, and I will put that down below. I made them for my sourdough bread loaves, but they're also super handy for storing my ground wheat. After grinding up my fresh wheat, I always store it straight into the freezer and pull it out when I need it. I'll also list below this wheat grinder that I'm using that conveniently connects to my KitchenAid.
So this is my go-to sourdough pancake / waffle recipe. I make it all the time and it's super simple. So I start out with whole ground wheat. I know that sounds a little dense, a little fibrous, but actually it's the fermentation process that breaks down that whole wheat that makes it so much better and really easy to digest. So I'm gonna do 1.5 cups of whole ground wheat. 1.5 cups of milk. In this case, we're doing our sour milk, or you could do buttermilk as well. And 1/2 cup of sourdough discard. Now you could use fed sourdough or you could do discard. I usually do a discard. This is kind of my recipe that I use when I need to discard and feed my sourdough starter in order to make bread. So 1/2 cup of sourdough discard. And I'm just eyeballing that really, and I've left enough in my container for me to feed the sourdough and start all over again with making some bread. Once I've mixed these 3 ingredients, I just put this in the fridge and let it ferment. So the longest I've let this sit and ferment in the fridge was a whole week. And I know that sounds like a long time, but it doesn't get sour. It's kind of amazing. It doesn't even get sour. It just ferments and holds.
So after this has fermented, then I will add the rest of my ingredients for my sourdough waffles or pancakes, and I will show that to you here in just a minute when we get to making those.
Whew, it is so warm in here and humid. Okay, so we're gonna move on to our biscuit recipe. This biscuit recipe I have adapted from my mama's cheesy biscuit recipe, which I've actually shared here on the channel. I'll put that down in the description box if you wanna get that one. But we're gonna make up some biscuits for Biscuits and Gravy for this weekend.
So for our biscuits and gravy, we are going to do 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, and I started out by doing 3 teaspoons of baking powder, following my cheesy biscuit recipe, which works great because they're drop biscuits. But since these biscuits are rolled out and you're really looking for that rise and fluffiness, I actually would substitute, instead of 3 teaspoons of baking powder, do 1 teaspoon of baking soda to really get that reaction between the sour milk and the baking soda that I was talking about. So that's what I would suggest. And then you're gonna go ahead and shred 2 cubes or 1 cup of cold, chilled, maybe even frozen butter. This is a quick version that I like to do sometimes if I don't want to use my KitchenAid or a blender to really cut that butter in. I just use my cheese grater. This is what's going to make our biscuits buttery and flaky and oh so delicious. So I was going to add 1.5 cups of sour milk to this recipe, but I only ended up using about 1 cup of sour milk and 1 egg. And I added a little bit of flour just to make sure it wasn't too wet and get the right consistency. A lot of this I was just doing by the feel and what felt right with the dough. But I hope it's not confusing. I will be putting the recipe down in the description box below, so no worries. This is such a special treat for our family. I do not always make biscuits and gravy, but when I do, my family just loves these feel-good, farm-cooked meals, and especially for breakfast. You can put this dough in the refrigerator for 30 minutes, or you can just leave it in the fridge overnight and bake it up in the morning when you're ready to make fresh baked biscuits for breakfast. And that's exactly what we're gonna do. For really fluffy biscuits, you want to make sure not to roll it too thin. So I would roll your biscuit dough between 1/2 inch to 1 inch thick. And we're doing a different variety of sizes of biscuits here. And Myra thought that was really fun.
This one that was so perfect that I made. Yeah, we're doing it big to little.
Myra, show us the little one.
This is the little one.
Oh my gosh, it's so cute. So we have this whole set. This is the big one, huh?
Uh-huh.
And we kind of did a mix so that the kids could have some medium-sized one. And Myra made this little baby
and
biscuit.
I made big ones.
With this one. So I'll put these.
The big ones?
Yeah. So I'll list those all on in the description box. All of these little biscuit cutters that we used. But good job, Myra. You did it, girlfriend. They're gonna be so yummy. Maybe you should just put all the babies just in all the little spaces, okay?
Me.
Baby biscuits. For the sausage, I'm just using a normal breakfast sausage here and let that saute and get crispy. And then I just added about a 1/4 cup of flour and some milk and some salt and pepper. It's pretty darn simple. So on to our sourdough discard, waffles or pancakes. This recipe is so simple, I use it all the time. Anytime I'm discarding, I usually put a batch of this pancake mix into the fridge to ferment. So after it's done fermenting, I add 3 teaspoons of baking powder, a teaspoon of salt, a dash of cinnamon, 2 eggs, and about 1/4 to a half a teaspoon of baking soda. And I just use any fat that I have that's on hand. My favorite and most preferred is butter because it just tastes so good and so rich. And I do about 1/4 to a half a cup of fat. And a lot of times I use coconut oil or vegetable oil as well. And you can just see the baking soda reacting with the sour milk here. The same thing with buttermilk. It just causes those bubbles and that rise that happens. Pancakes or waffles are such a staple in our house. We have them at least every weekend, maybe a couple times a week. What about you? Do you have pancakes every week in your house? What are some of your breakfast staples? Put down in the comments below. My modern waffle maker broke, so I've been using this thrifted vintage waffle maker, and it seems to work like a charm. And it makes these fantastic crispy vintage, I guess you could say, waffles. What do you think? I absolutely love all natural, real maple syrup, but it hasn't always been making it on the grocery list as far as the budget goes. So I have been making a lot of my own berry syrup lately. And I just start out with some frozen blueberries, add a little bit of butter and some sugar and cornstarch. And I just leave it on the stove to simmer until it gets this nice, thick, bubbly consistency. And sometimes I add a little bit of vanilla extract or maybe a little bit of cinnamon. And it's quick and easy and delicious. So what other farm fresh meals would you like to see me make here on the channel? I would like you to go down to the description box below, check out the recipes that are in there and some of the former videos that are in there as well, and keep watching. If you haven't already, go ahead and push the subscribe button because I make a new video every weekend here on the Pioneer Home, and I'll catch you next time. Love you lots!